What happens when the most powerful man in the werewolf world completely ignores the woman carrying his heir? She suffers in silence. But when a catastrophic childbirth leaves her fighting for her life, the Alpha King's regret might just come too late. This is a story of heartbreak, betrayal, and redemption. The Blackwood estate was a sprawling masterpiece of modern architecture, nestled deep within the dense, rain-soaked pines of the Pacific Northwest. With its floor-to-ceiling windows and sweeping views of the churning ocean, it was designed to be a sanctuary for the Alpha King and his Luna. Instead, for 24-year-old Claudia Sassa, it had become a gilded cage. Claudia stood by the massive glass panes, her hands resting protectively over her swollen belly. She was 7 months pregnant with the next heir to the Crescent faction, the largest and most ruthless werewolf pack on the western seaboard. Yet, as she stared out into the grey mist, she had never felt more entirely alone. When Dominic Blackwood first realized that Claudia was his fated mate, his obsession had been terrifying and beautiful. He was a force of nature, commanding, fiercely protective, and deeply affectionate. He had moved mountains to bring her into his world, promising her a life where she would never know neglect. But the moment the pack's lead physician, Dr. Harrison Gable, confirmed the pregnancy, a switch flipped in the Alpha King's mind. Dominic's protective instincts warped into a cold, hyper-fixated ambition. He convinced himself that to protect his unborn pup, he needed to eradicate every single threat to his territory. He began expanding the pack's borders, absorbing rogue factions, and attending endless corporate and political summits in Seattle and Portland. He was building an empire for his heir, but in the process, he completely abandoned the woman carrying the child. Still staring at the driveway, Claudia? A soft, sympathetic voice echoed through the vast living room. Claudia turned to see Bridget Cole, her closest confidant and the pack's head archivist, carrying a tray with a steaming mug of raspberry leaf tea. "I thought he might come back for the ultrasound today," Claudia murmured, taking the mug with a trembling hand. "He promised he would be here for this one." Bridget's jaw tightened. "Dominic he's losing his way, Claudia. I heard from the border patrols. He extended the summit in Seattle by another 3 days. Sylvia Sterling convinced him that the treaty with the Northern Fangs required his immediate, undivided attention." At the mention of Sylvia, Claudia's stomach twisted in a painful knot. Sylvia Sterling was Dominic's chief diplomat. She was cunning, stunningly beautiful, and possessed a ruthless political mind. Claudia knew Sylvia didn't want Dominic romantically. Sylvia worshipped power, and she knew that keeping the Alpha King focused on expansion gave her unprecedented control over the pack. Sylvia viewed Claudia's pregnancy as a vulnerability, a messy domestic distraction that needed to be managed and pushed aside. "I tried to mind-link him this morning," Claudia confessed, her voice cracking. "The connection was blocked. He put up his mental walls, so I called his cell. Sylvia answered. She told me he was in a crucial negotiation and asked if my call was a medical emergency or just hormonal anxiety." Bridget slammed the tray down on the coffee table. "That manipulative witch! You are the Luna! You carry the royal bloodline! Dominic is an absolute fool for allowing her to screen his calls." But Claudia was too exhausted to feel angry. The pregnancy was taking a brutal toll on her human-born body. Werewolf pups grew rapidly and possessed strong, volatile auras. Without the alpha's physical presence to soothe the pup's energy and stabilize the mother's system, Claudia was suffering. She couldn't sleep. She was rapidly losing weight in her face and arms, while her belly grew unnaturally heavy, and her blood pressure had been steadily climbing. Later that afternoon, Claudia sat on the sterile examination table in the pack's private medical wing. Dr. Gable, a silver-haired wolf with decades of experience, wrapped the blood pressure cuff around her thin arm. His brow furrowed as he looked at the digital readout. 145/95, Luna, Dr. Gable said, his tone thick with worry. "Your body is under immense distress. The pup's wolf gene is dominant, and it's drawing heavily on your reserves. I need the alpha here." His pheromones and proximity are biologically necessary to ease your nervous system. He's in Seattle, Harrison, Claudia said quietly, looking down at her hands. Can you just give me something for the pain in my lower back? Dr. Gable sighed, writing a prescription for a mild, pregnancy-safe muscle relaxant. Claudia, I am speaking to you not just as your doctor, but as an elder of this pack. You are showing early signs of preeclampsia. If Dominic does not return to ground your energy, your body might force early labor to protect itself, and a premature werewolf birth. The trauma to a mother's body is catastrophic. Claudia nodded numbly. She walked back to the empty mansion, the silence of the halls deafening. That night, she lay in their massive king-sized bed, surrounded by Dominic's scent on the pillows, which only made the ache in her chest sharper. She clutched her phone, typing out a message. Dominic, please come home. Dr. Gable is worried. I need you. I'm scared. She hovered her thumb over the send button for a long time. Then, remembering Sylvia's mocking tone, she deleted the text. If the Alpha King didn't care enough to check on his mate, she wasn't going to beg. She turned off her bedside lamp, wrapping her arms around her belly, and cried herself to sleep. 4 weeks later. The Pacific Northwest was battered by a violent atmospheric river. Howling winds lashed against the Blackwood estate, rattling the reinforced glass and tearing branches from the ancient pines. Inside, the atmosphere was just as chaotic. Claudia was exactly 34 weeks along. Dominic had returned to the estate twice during that month, but he had been a ghost. He was always on his phone, always pacing the study, barking orders to his beta. When Claudia tried to talk to him about the nursery or the terrifying spikes in her blood pressure, he had simply kissed her forehead, handed her a platinum credit card, and told her to hire whoever you need, sweetheart. I have to secure the eastern border. He had looked right past her sunken eyes and pale skin. Now, at 11 p.m. on a stormy Tuesday, the breaking point arrived. Claudia was in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water, when a blinding, tearing agony ripped through her abdomen. It wasn't a standard contraction. It felt as though her very soul was being split in half. She gasped, dropping the glass. It shattered across the hardwood floor, just as a gush of warm fluid soaked her legs. Her water had broken. It was too early. Way too early. Bridget! Claudia screamed, her voice tearing through the empty house. Bridget, who had practically moved into the guest wing to keep Claudia company, sprinted down the stairs. Seeing the puddle of water and Claudia clutching the granite counter, her face went ghost white. Oh, goddess, no. It's too soon. Within minutes, Bridget had Claudia in the back of an SUV, tearing down the winding mountain road toward the pack's hidden medical facility. The storm raged outside, rain violently drumming against the roof. In the back seat, Claudia writhed in agony. The pup's dormant wolf spirit was panicking, sensing the mother's failing body, and it was violently fighting its way out. "Call him!" Claudia sobbed, her fingernails digging into the leather seats. "Bridget, please, call Dominic!" Bridget dialed the Alpha's private number, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. It rang 3 times before clicking over. "This is Sylvia Sterling. The Alpha King is currently addressing the Lycan Council and cannot be disturbed. State your business." "Sylvia, you listen to me, you arrogant parasite!" Bridget roared over the speakerphone, her eyes flashing gold with her own wolf's fury. "Claudia is in premature labor. Her water broke and she is bleeding. You get Dominic out of that room right now, or I swear to the moon goddess, I will rip your throat out with my teeth." There was a brief pause on the line. Then Sylvia's calm, detached voice replied, "Bridget, please control your dramatics. We are in the middle of ratifying a blood treaty." A false labor alarm is not an excuse to humiliate the Alpha in front of the council. Give Claudia some ice chips. He will call when he is finished. The line went dead. Bridget threw the phone at the dashboard, screaming a string of curses. Claudia let out a guttural cry of despair, the physical pain now entirely eclipsed by the agonizing heartbreak. Her mate had chosen politics over her life. The mating bond inside her chest, already frayed from months of neglect, began to wither. They crashed through the emergency doors of the medical center. Dr. Gable and a team of nurses were already waiting, having been alerted by the estate's security. They rushed Claudia onto a gurney. The next 3 hours were a blur of blood, screaming, and sheer terror. Claudia's blood pressure skyrocketed to lethal levels. Her body was failing to process the immense supernatural energy of the birth. "Doctor," Gable's face was a mask of sheer panic as he barked orders. "Her organs are under too much stress. We need the Alpha to stabilize her heart rate." "Where the hell is Blackwood?" Gable yelled, his hand stained with blood. "He's not coming, Harrison," Bridget cried, holding Claudia's limp, sweating hand. "He's not coming. Push, Claudia. You have to push now, or you will both die," the doctor commanded. With a final earth-shattering scream that seemed to tear her vocal cords, Claudia gave one last, desperate push. A sharp, piercing cry echoed through the sterile room. A baby boy, the heir to the Crescent faction. Bridget gasped in relief, tears streaming down her face. "You did it, Claudia. You have a beautiful boy." But Claudia didn't look at the baby. Her eyes were wide, staring blankly at the ceiling. A sudden, terrifying amount of blood spilled onto the sheets. "Placental abruption!" Dr. Gable shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "She's hemorrhaging! Crash cart, now! We're losing her!" Monitors began to scream a high-pitched, continuous beep. Claudia felt the room grow cold. The agonizing pain faded into a strange, floating numbness. She heard Bridget screaming her name, heard the frantic rush of the medical team, but it all sounded like it was underwater. As the darkness pulled her under, her last conscious thought was of Dominic and how she would never get to say goodbye. Her eyes rolled back, and the heart monitor flatlined. 200 miles away, in a lavish, heavily guarded boardroom in Seattle, Alpha Dominic Blackwood raised a crystal glass of bourbon to toast the newly signed treaty. Sylvia stood by his side, smiling a triumphant, predatory smile. Dominic brought the glass to his lips. Suddenly, an invisible force slammed into his chest like a freight train. He choked, dropping the glass. It shattered violently against the marble floor. Dominic staggered backward, clutching his heart as a primal, agonizing roar tore itself from his throat. His eyes flashed a bright, terrifying crimson. The mating bond, the ethereal thread connecting his soul to Claudia's, had just snapped, leaving behind a cold, hollow abyss. "Dominic? Alpha?" Sylvia asked, stepping forward with feigned concern. Dominic ignored her. His mind violently reached out across the bond, searching for Claudia's warm, familiar presence. He found nothing. Only silence. Only death. What have I done?" he whispered, his voice trembling as the sheer magnitude of his monstrous neglect finally crashed down upon him. The private jet tore through the stormy sky, violently turbulent as it descended toward the private airstrip near the Blackwood estate. Inside the cabin, Dominic Blackwood was a man unraveling. The impeccable, untouchable Alpha King was gone, replaced by a frantic, trembling mess. His dress shirt was torn where he had clawed at his own chest, desperate to alleviate the suffocating void where his mating bond had once pulsed with Claudia's warm, golden light. Sylvia Croft sat across from him, her usual composed demeanor faltering. "Alpha, you need to calm down. Dr. Gable is the best. He will—" Dominic's head snapped up, his eyes entirely crimson. A low, vibrating growl shook the very walls of the aircraft. "If she is dead, Sylvia, I will tear you apart with my bare hands, and then I will tear myself apart." The sheer lethality in his voice silenced her instantly. The moment the plane's wheels hit the tarmac, Dominic didn't wait for the stairs to fully deploy. He threw open the emergency exit and leaped into the freezing rain, shifting into his massive, pitch-black wolf mid-air. He sprinted the 5 miles to the medical center, his paws tearing up the asphalt, his lungs burning. When he burst through the double doors of the clinic, shifting back to his human form, and uncaring of his naked, rain-slicked state, the heavy scent of antiseptic, fear, and metallic blood hit him like a physical blow. He found Bridget sitting on the floor of the waiting room, her clothes stained with crimson. She looked up, her eyes red and hollow. "Bridget!" Dominic gasped, his chest heaving as a terrified nurse rushed over to drape a blanket over his shoulders. "Where is she? Where is my mate?" Bridget slowly stood up. She didn't bow to her alpha. She didn't lower her gaze. In a shocking breach of protocol that would normally warrant execution, she stepped forward and slapped the Alpha King across the face with all her werewolf strength. The crack echoed through the silent hallway. Dominic didn't even flinch. He deserved much worse. "Your mate," Bridget spat, her voice trembling with venomous rage. "You lost the right to call her that weeks ago. You ignored her. You left her to waste away while you played politician. And tonight, when her body literally broke under the weight of carrying your heir, your secretary told me not to interrupt your precious meeting." Dominic's heart stopped. Sylvia knew. "She refused to put the call through while Claudia was bleeding out in my car," Bridget screamed, tears spilling over her cheeks. Before Dominic could process the absolute betrayal of his chief diplomat, the heavy surgical doors swung open. Dr. Harrison Gable stepped out. He looked 10 years older, his surgical scrubs soaked in Claudia's blood. He had consulted specialists from Harborview Medical Center in Seattle over a frantic video call, utilizing massive transfusion protocols and real-world trauma interventions alongside pack magic to fight the catastrophic hemorrhaging. "Harrison," Dominic choked out, stepping forward. "Tell me she's alive. Please." Dr. Gable pulled off his surgical cap, his expression grim. "We managed to restart her heart, Alpha. But the massive loss of blood and the violent premature separation of the placenta caused disseminated intravascular coagulation. Her blood stopped clotting. We pumped her full of fluids and blood from the pack's reserves. She is alive, but she is in a deep, medically induced coma to protect her brain function. I cannot guarantee when or if she will wake up." Dominic fell to his knees. The marble floor was unforgiving, but he welcomed the pain. He buried his face in his hands, releasing a broken, guttural sob that sent shivers down the spines of the medical staff. The most feared man on the western seaboard was weeping on the floor, broken by his own arrogance. "And my son?" Dominic whispered, terrified of the answer. "The boy is strong. His wolf gene protected him," Dr. Gable replied softly. "He is in the neonatal intensive care incubator, but he needs his mother, Dominic, and she needed you." Over the next month, the Crescent faction witnessed a massive, tectonic shift in power. Dominic was a ghost of his former self. His first act after seeing his tiny, fragile son in the incubator was to drag Sylvia Croft before the pack elders. When the truth of her actions came to light, that she had willfully blocked emergency medical communication to secure a political treaty, the social accountability was swift and brutal. Dominic didn't just strip her of her title, he banished her, forcing her out into the harsh rogue territories without a penny to her name. But the pack's view of Dominic had also fundamentally changed. They had revered him as a brilliant tactician, but seeing their gentle beloved Luna lying comatose in a hospital bed because of his neglect shattered his flawless image. Whispers of his failure echoed through the estate. The elders looked at him with quiet disappointment. He had secured their borders, but he had failed his most sacred duty as a mate. Every single day, Dominic sat by Claudia's bedside. He held her pale, lifeless hand, pouring his alpha aura into her frail body, begging the moon goddess for a second chance. He read to her. He apologized thousands of times, his tears staining her sheets. He built a temporary crib in her hospital room so that their son, whom Bridget had temporarily named Arthur, could sleep near his mother's scent. "Please, Claudia," Dominic whispered one rainy afternoon, pressing his forehead against her knuckles. "Come back to me. I will burn the entire empire to the ground if it means seeing you smile again. I will give up the crown. Just don't leave me in this dark." As if the universe finally decided he had suffered enough, a faint, almost imperceptible twitch moved Claudia's fingers. Dominic's breath hitched. He watched, paralyzed with desperate hope, as Claudia's eyelids fluttered. Slowly, painfully, her eyes opened. They were glassy and unfocused at first, adjusting to the dim light of the room. "Claudia," Dominic breathed, standing up and leaning over her, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Baby, can you hear me?" Claudia turned her head. Her eyes locked onto his. But what Dominic saw in her gaze made his blood run completely cold. There was no warmth, no love. The ethereal golden string that once bound their souls together was nothing but dead ash. "Where is my son?" she rasped, her voice dry and brittle. She didn't ask for him. She didn't reach for him. The Alpha King realized with crushing certainty that his mate had woken up, but the woman who loved him was gone. The recovery was grueling. Claudia had to relearn how to walk, how to build her stamina, and how to exist in a body that had been pushed to the absolute brink of death. But she did not do it for Dominic. She did it entirely for Arthur. When they finally returned to the Blackwood estate, the dynamic within the pack had irreversibly shifted. Claudia was no longer the quiet, accommodating human girl who waited by the window for her alpha to return. She had faced death and returned with a spine of forged steel. She took up residence in the east wing of the estate, moving her belongings out of the master suite. When Dominic tried to protest, stepping into her doorway with a look of desperate sorrow, Claudia stopped him with a single, icy glare. "You do not get to dictate where I sleep, Dominic," Claudia said, her tone perfectly even, devoid of any anger or heat, which somehow made it worse. "You forfeited that right when you left me to die." "Claudia, please," Dominic pleaded, taking a step forward, his hands raised in surrender. "I made a catastrophic mistake. I let my paranoia and my ambition blind me. I am trying to fix it. Let me take care of you. Let me be a father to Arthur." "You can be a father to Arthur," Claudia replied calmly, picking up the fussy infant and rocking him expertly against her chest. "He needs his alpha. But do not confuse your access to my son with access to me. We are co-parents, Dominic, and we are leaders of this pack. Nothing more." The rejection hit him like a physical blow, forcing the breath from his lungs. The pack felt the shift in power immediately. As Claudia grew stronger, she began to step into the role of Luna with unprecedented authority. She no longer deferred to the Beta or the Council elders. She organized pack finances, initiated new social programs for the elderly and pregnant mothers, and completely restructured the pack's medical protocols to ensure no female would ever be subjected to the neglect she had suffered. The pack, deeply moved by her resilience and disgusted by Dominic's past actions, rallied behind her with fierce loyalty. The reversal of power was absolute. Dominic was still the alpha in name and strength, but the true heart and soul of the Crescent faction belonged to Claudia. His commands were followed out of duty, hers were followed out of profound respect and love. One evening, 6 months after Arthur's birth, a massive pack gathering was held in the Grand Hall. The estate was filled with music, laughter, and the chaotic energy of hundreds of wolves. Claudia stood on the balcony overlooking the hall, dressed in a stunning emerald gown that highlighted her regained vitality. She held a sleeping Arthur in her arms. She looked ethereal, a true queen who had survived the fire and emerged untouchable. Dominic approached her slowly, keeping a respectful distance. He watched her profile, his heart aching with a love so profound and a regret so bitter it tasted like ash in his mouth. He had spent the last 6 months groveling, proving his dedication, cancelling summits, and remaining firmly by her side whenever she allowed it. He was a changed man, stripped of his toxic ambition, entirely focused on his family. But the wall she had built around her heart remained impenetrable. "You look beautiful tonight, Claudia," he murmured softly over the din of the crowd below. Claudia didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on her people. Thank you, Alpha. The formal title was a knife to his chest. Will you ever forgive me? He asked, his voice breaking. Will I ever get my mate back? Claudia finally turned to look at him. There was no hatred in her eyes, only a quiet, resolute strength. I forgive you for being a fool, Dominic. Holding on to anger will only poison me, and I refuse to be poisoned. But trust is not given. It is earned. You broke me. You broke our bond. I will spend the rest of my immortal life earning it back, Dominic vowed, dropping to one knee before her, bowing his head in total submission, a sight that would have shocked the pack to their core had they been watching. I am yours, Claudia. Even if you never let me touch you again, I am your loyal servant. You are the true power of this pack. Claudia looked down at the most feared Alpha in the world, kneeling at her feet. She didn't tell him to stand. She simply adjusted Arthur in her arms, feeling the warm, steady heartbeat of the son she had fought so hard to bring into the world. We will see, Dominic, she said softly, turning her gaze back to the moonlit sky. We will see. She had lost her innocence, but she had gained an empire. The Alpha King had ignored his mate, and in doing so, he had forged his own master. If Claudia's journey from a neglected mate to a powerful, independent Luna inspired you, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with anyone who loves a good redemption story and a fierce female lead. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss a dramatic werewolf tale. Comment below. Do you think Dominic deserves a second chance? See you next time.